Now, are you the person at school who never seemed to get picked for the team? Or does promotion at work always seem to pass you by? Michael Rosen ponders what it means to feel less adequate than everyone else in his series on being inferior.
My friend Graham came over to my house recently. He lives on the other side of London. He burst in through the front door and said, "Every light against me. Every light on red. Incredible." I thought about that. Would every single light have been red? Unlikely. So what kind of person is it who thinks he gets red lights against him? No matter how angry it makes him, wouldn't he be someone who's accepted that he's an all the lights are against me kind of person, as opposed to other people he knows, presumably, who are more green lighty? Stephen feels that he's a people get ahead of me person.
I'm the sort of person who gets pushed to the back of the queue, even if I started near the front. I'm the sort of person who almost apologises for standing in the space that I'm in. You know, excuse me, sorry, am I in the way? That sort of thing. And when you're walking along the street, I'm the one who's dodging in and out of people who are themselves walking in straight lines, because I don't want to get in the way.
So how do we get to know our place in the world? How is it that we think we have a position, a rank? Stephen there apologises for being in the way, and no doubt the people who walk in straight lines find it quite useful that he does. So was he born like that, or did he learn it? And if he learnt it, did he learn it at home, at school, or in the wider world? In this series, I'm going to look at what feeling inferior means, where it comes from, and is there anything you can do about it? Helping with some of the thinking will be the psychologist and writer Dorothy Rowe, and various people, some of whom for personal reasons don't want to use their real name.
When you spend nearly 50 years of your life in one sort of pattern, it's very hard to change to another pattern, and it becomes ingrained in you, doesn't it? It becomes a habit, I think, to apologise and to feel inferior.
50 years. Why would it stay with you so long? Perhaps it's because it starts at home, the place where, ironically, we expect to be looked after, safe, where we're made to feel good. Except it doesn't always pan out that way, as Joan knows from bitter experience.
My mother used to say things to me that made me feel as though I had no confidence. Say, for instance, if I was singing a song, as children do, she used to say, "Oh, you're not singing in tune." So eventually I just didn't bother to sing. My mother used to say to me, "Oh, you've got legs like tree trunks." And that used to make me feel absolutely awful. And to this day, I just not very keen on letting people see my legs, so I tend to wear trousers all the time. I can't ever remember her saying to me, "Oh, that's good, you've done that very well." And I honestly can say I can never remember her giving me a hug.
So, if you get the inferiority bug early on in life, it isn't something you just shed with the clothes that are too small. Joan talks of it as being ingrained. It's in your grain, part of the way you're made. But is that the way it really is? Dorothy Rowe.
To feel inferior, you're really saying that you're at the bottom of the hierarchy. And also you feel it's a sort of intrinsic thing. It isn't that just a thing, say you're the new person at work or you've just started at school and as time goes by you'll get better. But you're assuming that you're going to be inferior because that's who you are.
Is that what people say? They believe they're actually born with inferiority?
Many people feel that that's how they are. Of course, they weren't born inferior. I mean, obviously not. They were just born an ordinary baby, an ordinary person. But so many things happened to them before they were, say, 4 years old, because our memory really only starts at about 4 or 5. So many things had happened to them by then that they were feeling that they were intrinsically. After all, when you're little like that, adults around you are explaining the world to you. And if you have parents who are always saying, "You are a bad boy, you are a naughty girl," they're explaining to you that you're a boy or you're a girl, that's intrinsic, and that you're naughty, you're bad, you're inferior, you're unacceptable, and that's intrinsic.
I'd never thought of that. When we say naughty girl or bad boy, we're joining up something changeable, naughty, bad, with something unchangeable, biological and genetic, girl, boy, making it a statement of absolute fact for the child concerned. I wonder, is that a remnant of the idea that the Puritans gave us, that we're all born evil? And though most of us would probably scoff at this notion, it still lingers in the way we talk. Here's Stephen again.
The story begins, I suppose, when I was born. I had a squint, quite a noticeable squint.
So Stephen thinks that the story begins with something he was born with. But Dorothy said these feelings aren't facts, they're ideas. How can what Stephen calls a squint be an idea? Joan again.
My mother used to say to me, "You've got a big bum," and things like that, which over the years have given me all sorts of complexes about myself.
So bits of our bodies become sites for some parents to visit and describe to us as unsatisfactory. Eyes, legs, bums and the rest become a kind of proving ground for some parents to show why and how you're not good enough. And because it's the body we're talking about here, they're implying that it's irredeemable, it's just the way you're made. But we don't have to go along with that, do we? Here's Jessie.
You do consent by stepping backwards, by not standing up for yourself. But when you're a child, you're powerless. And in some ways, the only way to keep safe is to be compliant. It's a learned response.
Now that's worrying, isn't it? That somehow we collaborate with what's been said to us. No point in arguing that you haven't got a squint, or, so what if I have got thick legs? It doesn't make me a bad person, does it? I guess it's easy to understand that when we're talking about very young children, they would find it very hard to ignore what their parents are telling them. But surely, when you become a teenager, a young adult and beyond, you can just shake off what your parents have said to you. Well, the odd thing about parents is they go on saying the same kind of things to you, no matter what stage you are in your life.
When I was choosing a career, I wanted to go to university. I wanted to become a librarian. My mother said to me, "You aren't clever enough to go to university. You better become a primary school teacher." I can hear her voice. I can hear the sharpness of her tone, the dismissive attitude.
I think the worst thing was when my father didn't appreciate what I was going to do for a living. He had no interest in me whatsoever when I was going to art college, yet he came to my graduation day and he walked around the show and he said, his words were, "I had no idea what you were doing," and he gave me 50 quid as a cheque, as if that was like the payoff. "Thank you very much." And I thought at that point, I feel really inferior. You know, I felt that I hadn't followed the path that he wanted me to do, and he'd almost given up. He'd sort of said, "Right, okay, well that's it, I'm washing my hands of you now."
I trained to be an interior designer, and my mother spent days, weeks picking my brains about what wallpaper for God's sake, to put in her bathroom. And then she went into a shop, bearing in mind that I qualified with a distinction. She went into a shop and spoke to a Saturday girl in a wallpaper shop and went, "Oh, this girl told me what to buy," and put this wallpaper up, which just looks absolutely horrific. If I said it, she won't listen to me. If anybody else said it, they're speaking words of wisdom. It makes me feel half an inch tall. And that's the way it's always been.
Now, there has to be a way out of these feelings of uselessness, or at least the possibility of some kind of repositioning. Otherwise we'd all be automata, constructed out of what our parents said to us. Joan suggests that one starting point is to try and gather together some understanding of why our parents might have said that we weren't good enough.
I think my mother probably was projecting insecurities onto me. She had a hard life as well. My mother was one of 3 girls, and her father and mother split up when my mother was quite young, and my mother had to go and live in an orphanage, so I think that had a great bearing on how she was. But she would never talk to us children about it until just perhaps a few years before she died. Parents
often do to their children what was done to them. many parents, when faced with bringing up their own children, what they worry about most is not what they do to or for their children, but what their own parents will think of them. Will their parents approve of how they're being a parent?
So there's some kind of baton passing of inadequacy going on here.
Inadequacy gets passed down from generation to generation. Children learn from parents, and the parents show how an adult behaves in the world, and the child is trying to find out how he should behave. Well, that's how my mother behaves, that's how my father behaves. And some children, of course, rebel against that, but lots don't.
My image there of baton passing suggests something rigid and unchanging, passing down through the generations. Perhaps I've overstated it. Richard, who we heard from talking about his father paying him off with 50 quid, was being listened to by his sister Debbie.
I've said to my brother before, you are hurt by the way you've been treated as a young person, and you've got to let it go because you're now the age you are, which is 52? One. 51.
Makes a difference.
You've got to say, it doesn't matter what my father thinks because I'm 51 years old and I am what I am and I'm happy with what I am.
Just let go of it, she says. I can't think of the number of times I've wanted to say that to my friend Graham, who only ever meets red lights. He's in his late 60s, and over again Graham explains to me that his father never really appreciated the fact that he spent his working life looking at the skins of mammals, or that he was really passionate about bebop jazz. If only I could convince him that there's nothing intrinsically inferior about mammal skins and bebop, and it's much more likely that his father was trying to fend off the strangeness of Graham's life and interests and make them safe by diminishing them. One way to drop the baton given to us is if we become parents ourselves, like Sophie.
I consciously made my daughter confident of her body and her abilities by forever praising her and always saying that she could do it. When she said she couldn't do something and that she was awful at it, I'd say, well, just try again, or it doesn't matter. Or I would concentrate on the positive things that she was really good at, and I've always nurtured that in her.
And Stephen, who I should have said had an op to get rid of that squint, has children now, which must mean, by the way, that someone must have thought that he was definitely not inferior. But those children, have they been handed the baton of inadequacy?
I've got 3 girls and a boy. How do I stop them feeling inferior? I heard one of them saying to another child the other day, you're better than me at such, whatever it was, reading or whatever it was. And I asked her afterwards, I said, why do you think that he's better than you? You're good at a lot of things. And I thought, I need to find strategies for the girls to use.
But that's not going to be easy, because after home comes school, and a whole new set of standards by which you can be judged appear. My 5-year-old came home from school last week and said that she had received 8 smiley faces for good work. Zoe got 14 smiley faces, but Tracy had only got 3. What? You mean there's a smiley face league table for 5-year-olds? In the next programme, I'll look at what happens in school and whether inferiority is the invisible lesson on the timetable.
On Being Inferior was written and presented by Michael Rosen. The producer was Emma Kingsley. And if you've been affected by any of the issues in the programme or would like to speak to someone about further sources of information and advice, please call the Radio 4 Action Line on 0800 44 044. Calls are free and confidential.
It's odd, isn't it, that the very people you trust the most will insist on sending you off to a place where you may well end up feeling the most unsafe you'll ever feel in the whole of your life.
I'm thinking of my first English teacher. We were in assembly one morning and she said, if anybody wants any praise for any member of their family, come up now. So out I trot and say that my sister Kate was in hospital. She just had a baby and she had blood clots and she was actually very ill. And this particular teacher said, oh, go and sit down, you stupid girl.
In this programme, I'll be looking at the fact that though school will teach you all sorts of things about triangles, the First World War, and how to say "how are you" in Spanish, it may also teach you that you aren't worth very much. Some people love school. It bolsters their confidence. They breathe success through every pore of their bodies. But for many others, school is a place where you're judged as below par, less than acceptable quality. And that can stay with you throughout your life, and it's those feelings I'll be exploring. I think of schools as places where three worlds collide. The school ethos meets the home and youth cultures of the children, and the consequence of many of these collisions is that some people emerge from school convinced that they're inferior. Penny tried to bring her home to school and got slapped down for it. Simon found that his home culture didn't fit the youth culture.
I was, I suppose, sort of the quiet, bookish sort, not really interested in playground games, or simply quite happy wrapped up in a book in a corner. And when you're a child being different, other children will see you as somehow odd and beneath them. You know, sort of, well, he's no good at catching a ball or practically anything. And without a frame of reference, I suppose I started to believe it.
Years later, you might figure out that the very people pushing you down and succeeding were doing it because they feared that they themselves weren't worth very much. All they were doing was making you feel bad because they were worried. Watching my kids go through London secondary schools, I've often wondered if the knockabout insult culture they've been part of was a way of disguising that, in reality, everyone was worried that they weren't good enough, so everyone tried to make everyone else feel bad. The writer and psychologist Dorothy Rowe sees those children who are marked out as not good enough compensating for it.
In many schools, the children who are regarded by the teachers as not being so bright often create a kind of superiority for themselves by saying that the brainy kids are stupid, really, or despising the brainy kids and attacking the brainy kids. You're assuring yourself that there's lots about you to be proud of, and the people who other people think are superior are actually not very good at all.
Schools are also places with in-crowds, which is only another way of saying that schools are places without crowds, as Claire discovered.
I was forever starting new schools. I think I went to about 11 schools and all. And I was the new girl, and everybody made a big fuss about the new girl. And after about 2 hours, I was discarded because the novelty was over. Oh, she's not that interesting. She's not that fantastic. And she's as boring as... I don't know what they thought of me. I mean, they dropped me like a hot brick. At school, I was the one that was not picked for the sports teams. I was the last one on anybody's list for anything at all. And if I made friends, I'd probably make friends with the people that were outcasts in the same way that I was an outcast. People that were slightly different, people that had skin problems or whatever, they'd be my friends, I'd be their friends, but nobody else wanted to know.
I can remember something of what Claire went through. At the age of 16, I went from what people called an ordinary grammar school to a very posh one, and I was brought in front of a class of some 50 boys, and the form teacher said, "This is Rosen. He's new." And a voice came from the back, "Big, innit?" Which was precisely what I didn't feel. But the content of what's actually being taught can create its own in and out crowds too, especially if, like Tony, you're a newcomer, and what's more, he was black in a largely all-white school.
I was clearly different from everyone, I looked different from everyone, and I grew up in Oxfordshire, where in those days they did something called ITA, which was the phonetic alphabet. And in those days, which people don't do now, which is how they teach you to spell as you speak. And I was very good at that, and I was a reasonably bright young kid, and I was top of the class. I came to a new town, I went straight to the bottom, because I'd been taught to read and write in a way that nobody else did, and nobody picked up on it, and I never recovered from that, actually, educationally. And I was rubbish. You become what these other people probably want you to be, and they can then use you to make them strong. If you look at it as an adult, I'm looking back and thinking, actually, why the hell would an adult tell a child that they're rubbish? Because clearly the child's not getting it out of it, and I guess they probably got something out of it, inflicting their insecurity onto the child.
Last time we mentioned that when inferiority takes hold of us, we attach it to something that we believe is unchangeable and fixed, and so quite often it's about a bit of our bodies. When I went to that new school, I met for the first time anti-Semitic jokes. "Hey, don't lend him any money," my friends would say of me. "You'll never get it back." But running along with this was a set of gags and comments about how I looked like Dracula. I left that school convinced that I was ugly because I was Jewish, and there was nothing I could do about it.
I'm 14 years old. Well, as every teenager goes through, they always have problems with their looks. And I have a problem with my forehead because it's massive. My mum says that it's beautiful and I don't need to worry about it, but I can't not, because it's like everyone notices it, I think. There was an incident that made me feel inferior about my forehead when I was standing at the bus stop and a little boy came up to me, and because I'm quite tall, he looked up and he goes, "Whoa!" And I was like, "What?" And then he goes, "Look at your forehead, it's massive." And like all his friends around him were like laughing and stuff. And all my friends were like, "It's beautiful, it's gorgeous and everything." But when people like that just make you feel so small and humiliated, and it's just so embarrassing.
I can well understand that Charlotte's friends tell her she's gorgeous. In the history of the cinema, the camera has often lingered long and adoringly at women with large foreheads. Think Katharine Hepburn or Uma Thurman. But from where Charlotte stands, it seems as if knowing this wouldn't change how she feels. I mean, even if you could take your forehead off like a set of old clothes, it wouldn't necessarily help you deal with how you feel.
I have a real issue over clothes, and I know it stems from being at grammar school and not having the correct uniform, because my sister had been there and her old uniform was available, and as far as my parents were concerned, that was fine. A lot of my friends had when we first started the school, but then they changed some of the uniform and brought in new styles. But we were told we could use up the old uniform, but by the time a year had passed, everybody else in my class had the new summer uniform, but not me. And I absolutely hated it. Hated having this old dress. They were horrible anyway. And I can still feel myself going into panics sometimes when I'm going somewhere and I don't know what people will be wearing.
I was in a very similar situation as Mary at my secondary school, and I tried to get round it by writing a jokey article about it in a class magazine. And I mentioned how my mother tried to pass off my brother's too large, more worn jacket by saying, "It's good, have it. They're wearing them like that now." From then on, kids who I'd never met but who had read the article would call out at me in the playground, "It's good, have it. They're wearing them like that now." Brian went to a special school because he was partially sighted. And it should have been a more supportive place, shouldn't it?
When I was in junior school, I often had problems with ball games and things like that, rounders, football, whatever, because although I did go to a school for the partially sighted, there was a very competitive attitude and edge, and sometimes some of the older children had great pleasure in picking on the younger ones, particularly those whose eyesight was a little bit worse than theirs were, and even some of the teachers were not exactly supportive in the way that they didn't necessarily encourage you in playing games and whatever. And sometimes one or two of the teachers were actually quite cruel in the way that they criticised my abilities and my attitude towards the sports. And so I often felt that I couldn't do it, even though if I tried I probably could have.
Meanwhile, as the children are busy ranking themselves, schools are busy marking, testing and selecting as well. Or perhaps that should be, because school is a place where you're forever being graded, the children join in.
There are very few schools that don't grade the children in some way or other, over and above the natural differences that the children can see themselves. This has quite a profound effect on children in how they see their place, not just in the workplace, but in society, and how they adapt to that. Some teachers recognise this and work to try to make sure that each child has the experience of being special in some way, not just special naughty. But often the pressures on the teachers don't just prevent the teacher from doing that adequately.
Yes, and the inspectors now rush round schools and nod approvingly if they see what they call a clearly defined regime of reward and punishment in place. All over the country, children are coming home from schools with cards, stickers, certificates and smiley-face badges saying that they're doing well. Hooray for that, we say. And then we go into school for open day and we discover, as I did, that they're running an elaborate system of ticks, stickers and certificates. In my daughter's class, the children sit in a classroom where posters on the walls show each child's name, and alongside it, the numbers of ticks, stickers and certificates indicate who's best, who's not best, and who's worst. Just think, all day and every day, you can go about your life knowing that everyone in the class can look up at the wall and see that you're not good enough. And then the testing starts. Are you level 3 or level 4?
In our present educational system, we have this intense testing of children. And quite recently, Tony Blair said he wanted the schools to supply him with a list of their 5 or 10 most outstanding students so they could be given extra help. Well, how do all the other children feel who aren't on that list? They are being told that they are inferior, they don't deserve any special help. So the messages come through all the time from society that members of society are judging you, and if you don't measure up, then you're inferior in some way.
But it's not just the children who can feel inferior. Schools are full of adults, teachers, dinner ladies, admin staff. Some of them may find the prospect of the place quite daunting. Stephen loved teaching, but felt cowed by his colleagues in the staff room.
I notice sometimes in commenting in the staff room, for instance, that I can be completely ignored. It's not deliberate on other people's part. It may be that they just don't notice me. But there are times when other people speak up for me. So-and-so's got an idea. Can we listen to him? And I find people are standing up for me rather than myself, putting myself forward. And it makes me feel that I'm not perhaps belonging to the group. I feel a bit outside the group, I think.
So Stephen, who you remember from the last programme, always finds himself at the back of a queue, even when he started out at the front of it, is on the outside when he's in the workplace, which is precisely where I'm going next, as I leave school and into work for the next programme.
On Being Inferior was written and presented by Michael Rosen. The producer was Emma Kingsley. And if you've been affected by any of the issues in that programme or would like to speak to someone about further sources of information and advice, do call the Radio 4 Action Line on 0800 044 044. That's 0800 044 044, and all calls are free and confidential.
Off to work we go. Hi-ho.
Even though I was good at what I did, I wasn't good enough.
Oh yes, so many days when I thought I couldn't face going in.
There were 1 or 2 occasions when I actually felt like jumping under the train that I was supposed to be getting on rather than getting on it. That's how low I got at some points.
I've been kicked and punched.
And usually I was the one who got the blame, or I was the first to be criticised if something didn't get done quickly enough.
The thing I dreaded was being asked, do you have a couple of minutes?
Uh-oh. Not the couple of minutes, Gambit.
You come and see me in my office. And that was when my heart sank and the adrenaline started pumping and I knew I was in for a telling off.
In this programme, we move from home and school into the workplace. My first job was a traineeship, and I was sent on 9-month placements in different parts of the organisation. After about 2 years, I was told that there weren't any places left for me to be given a placement at. Sorry, Mike, says my personnel manager, haven't got anything for you. And I would go home and wait for him to ring. He never did. And I would sit there thinking about how I was the guy who was once good enough to get into the organisation but was not good enough to work there. I was now not even a good enough trainee.
We tend to think in hierarchies that there are people who are better than, the same as, or worse than me. And to feel inferior, you're really saying that you're at the bottom of the hierarchy.
Psychologist and writer Dorothy Rowe.
When I went to school, you either went to university, you were nurtured, or if you wanted to do something else, which I did, basically they washed their hands of you. And so because I didn't do the university thing, it was like you bit flotsam and jetsam.
So Louise there took with her from school into work the idea that she's like the rubbishy stuff that floats on water and lands up unwanted on beaches. Brian is partially sighted.
One little job I did do was at a well-known department store, which I won't mention, and I was working there for 6 months, and they had a relief manager come for 3 weeks, and about 2 weeks into his stay, he turned around to me and he said, "I don't know why they bothered employing you. You're too slow. You just can't keep up with everybody else."
He told me I was in the wrong job. The head teacher told me I was in the wrong job. I felt terrible.
Stephen is a teacher.
When one is feeling sidelined, you become oversensitive. I've heard it called hypervigilance, and one is on edge a lot of the time and watching your back and being careful what you say and feeling very inferior. I suppose one starts to believe what other people are saying.
Hypervigilant. So there comes a point where we're so watched over that we install some kind of watcher in our heads. That reminds me of the time I was on a placement at the old children's TV programme Play School. It was my job to write and direct 3 shows. Apart from the writing and mapping out of how the thing would look, the crunch came when I had to sit up above the studio and get the cameras to shoot it. This involved saying to a vision mixer such things as, "On camera 1, coming to 3, and go." In actual fact, the highly experienced vision mixer was getting to camera 3 before I lumbered along and told her to. And even when she didn't, the highly experienced TV producer who was overseeing me would shout out, "3! 3!" I was just muttering some kind of redundant litany. Camera 3, all right, no, I've got my shot, haven't we? 1, no, 2, don't I? Yeah. In the end, I told myself, I can't do this job. In fact, I still say to myself, that was a job I couldn't do, even though no one ever said to me, "You can't do this job." I installed that voice in my head myself. But what about those who can do the job, but there really are other voices telling them that there might be a problem?
I remember when I was probably about 22, going for my first job at a big blue ribbon company. I was told by the recruitment company, look, you're the first black guy we put in for this job, and so you better do quite well. So even then I felt, my God, I'm not the same as everyone else, so I better get the job, and I got it. And when I had the job, the regional people said to me, "Look, Tony, we're taking a chance on you being black for this job, so you need to be a top performer." And I was a top performer, so I always had that pressure behind me in terms of doing the job.
So Tony went off to do that job with the idea that, what precisely, that very nearly all black people aren't good enough for this line of work? That some people who are born with a dark skin are therefore born with a not usually good enough for this kind of job thingy? Now, this isn't something he's told himself. It's what he was told by someone higher than him in the hierarchy. Isn't this what we would call society constructing him in a certain kind of a way? But do we sometimes make our own constructions too?
I just wasn't good enough for the job. I wasn't the person that they wanted, but it always seemed to fall on my birthday.
On your birthday?
I went for the promotion and I found out, the day before my birthday came up that I didn't get the job, and then on my birthday I was told I was made redundant. And I just thought, this is me.
This is me? That's a bit fatalistic, isn't it? Claire seems to be saying that there's something intrinsic, as Dorothy Rowe would put it, about the fact that she's a get-sacked-on-your-birthday person. She's tying being sacked to the day she was born, and even perhaps to the very fact that she was born. How does this come about?
If you feel that you are in the bottom rung of the hierarchy, you're the lowest of the low, that can be a very painful place to be. But if you can feel that there is somebody lower than you in the hierarchy, then you have the pleasure of feeling a little bit superior. And you can expend a great deal of energy in preventing the lowest of the low from ever advancing in any way, so that a lot of your energies can go into keeping the people below you in their place.
It's part and parcel of that whole blame culture, and people will make people feel inferior to make themselves feel better in the eyes of their bosses. And I've been into meetings where people would start the meeting by belittling one of their colleagues. And I'm meant to join in and think that's quite funny. You're either in or out. Do you say something or do you not? And to my eternal shame, actually, at that stage, I was reasonably ambitious, thought I wanted the business. We didn't say anything.
So Tony, by saying nothing, was able to position himself as part of the in crowd. Nice place to be, Tony. Or is there a price to pay?
I genuinely believe that somebody's going to walk in one day and say, aha, we found you out. You shouldn't be here. In fact, you've done very well for the last 20, 30 years. And actually, my biggest fear is I'll end up back on a council estate with no money, people chasing for rent and debts and haranguing you for thinking you're clever. And I think, well, actually, I'm a CEO of a public company. What the hell are you talking about? But I genuinely feel that.
So where does that leave you?
If I look back where I came from in terms of growing up in care and stuff like that, I don't think I ever felt that I had an accepted place in society. So everything I've done is just great, and it's constant amazement, and it's a great journey, but it's still a journey for me. It's not somewhere where I feel I exist and live. So I feel like a visitor, really.
This sounds quite painful. And surely if something hurts, we all do something straight away to get rid of the pain, don't we? Or do we?
Whenever we do something that causes us nothing but pain, we try never to do that thing ever again. If we go on and on doing something that causes us pain, there is something in that situation that's rewarding us. So if you want to change your behaviour, ask yourself, what advantages do I get out of feeling inferior? And there are many advantages. If you feel inferior, then you don't have to accept responsibility for anything because superior people will do that. You can blame superior people when things go wrong because they haven't dealt with it properly, but it's not your fault. Then if you feel inferior, you never lose a competition because you never enter.
That's 3 advantages. Are there more?
Many inferior people, people who might say that they lack self-confidence, fear that if they became self-confident, people would stop doing things for them, helping them. People would stop giving them wonderful comments about how really good they are and how wonderfully they did that.
Actually, this is quite tough on people who think they're inferior, isn't it?
You can be so sure of your special position as being inferior that you are oblivious to other people's suffering. You don't have to pity other people because you don't even notice that there are other people in worse positions than yourself. You've cornered the market on suffering.
I'm quite unsettled by this way of looking at it. Pain as satisfying. But presumably some people want to get off this hook. One of Dorothy's points mentioned the advantages of avoiding responsibility. So taking on some responsibility for what we do would help? Here's Richard.
For example, if I'm given a position to be a creative director of something, you expect to then be in a position where you're making decisions related to creativity. But when it actually comes down to it, you're not, because an MD or someone who's in charge of finance who's got a bit of clout says, no, you can't do that. You're not in control. Because although you're given the control, you're not in control.
Control. Perhaps getting control is part of Dorothy's taking responsibility. For Brian, he decided he couldn't take being humiliated at work anymore and left.
I took the view that I was going to be caring for my wife, and at that time, caring for her was more important than anything else, and it was something that I could do without any worry, without any stress, and it was something that I wanted to do. I had what I consider, and I'd use this word loosely, I had control. I had control over what was happening. I could decide when and where things were done and how they were done, and that actually gave me a lot to look forward to, and it gave me a boost.
Interesting. So by getting out of work, he found a place where he felt he could get control. and he feels that that was good in itself.
It also enabled me to go into other avenues. It got me more interested in computing. I got involved with adaptive technology, which was to help my wife in her condition. And so, in a way, it was a spur.
So he reached another level. And in this new place, he started on a new track, learning new things, making discoveries, and finding that he could do interesting and useful work.
Many people feel that because they're inferior, nobody likes them, and they feel very much alone. Once they decide not to see themselves as inferior, they cease being frightened of other people. They're not predicting that other people will reject them. And we all know that once you have good relationships with other people, life becomes much more enjoyable. Because in the end, what matters most is how we feel about ourselves and our relationships with other people.
Yeah, but hang on, Dorothy. It's not just how we relate to other people, it's society as well, isn't it? Wasn't Brian told that he wasn't any good because he was partially sighted? Tony was a risk because he was black, and Claire learned that she was flotsam and jetsam. It's society that creates these inequalities, isn't it?
It happens all, I feel you're asking me, do people breathe? This is how society operates. We live in this hierarchies all the time. We don't live in a democracy, a real democracy, where people see one another as being equals. That's life.
Is it? And then we just have to live with it? Get over it, sort yourself out, move on?
I still had that feeling of inferiority, and I think that feeling is with me forever. But I must find ways of dealing with it.
Oh, well, that'll have to wait till the next programme.
On Being Inferior was written and presented by Michael Rosen and produced by Paul Cobrack. And if you've been affected by any of the issues in the programme and would like to speak to someone about further sources of information and advice, you can call the Radio 4 Action Line on 0800 044 044. That's 0800 044 044. Calls are free and confidential.
It's that I think people are better than me. I also think they won't be interested in me. And it's always been a surprise when people are interested to talk to me.
I think I kept my clothes on when I had sex. You think that's odd, don't you?
Have you ever read that poem by Fleur Adcock about things that sit on the end of your bed?
Yes, I have, Penny. It's called Things.
And it's about things that in the night sit on the end of your bed and mock you, and it's about what you've done during the day. Those instances when you go, did I say that? Did I do that? I grew up worrying about what people would think about me because of my father, because of my homemade clothes. They probably didn't even notice some of it.
Yes, the way Fleur Adcock puts it is that there are worse things than having behaved foolishly in public. And then she adds, it's 5 a.m. All the worst things come stalking in and stand icily about the bed, looking worse and worse and worse.
And then some of those things I've just described are very, very normal. Otherwise Fleur Adcock wouldn't have written that poem.
Well, in this series we started out at home, went to school and on to work, and in this programme we're going to be out there, in the stream of life, mixing and mingling, like Debbie here.
The only place I'm really happy is work, because I know my job and I know that the people that employ me are happy with what I do. But you put me into another circle of people, even friends, I worry that they won't like me for what I am. And these are people I've known for 15 years.
15 years?
It really is all a front. For instance, I've been on the PTA for years and feel fairly confident in organising that kind of event. As soon as the head teacher walks into a room and is expecting to speak to me, I would rather run a mile than have to speak to that head teacher, because she's somebody in a position of authority and I don't feel equipped. Even now I'm stumbling over my speech at the thought of having to speak to somebody like that in authority.
These feelings, like how small Debbie feels, can overwhelm and smother her years of experience on the PTA simply because the person she's talking to is in authority, up there. Some people might say, that's good. That woman is the head teacher. She must be the best for the job, and we need the best people to lead and rule over the rest of us, not mediocre ones. Psychologist and writer Dorothy Rowe.
Well, actually, we are run by mediocre, inadequate people. I think the state of the world shows that. But when we talk about superiority, it has to be linked to some sort of quality. Superior at what? Genetically, there is very, very little difference between groups of people and even between individuals. Human beings the world over are genetically very much the same.
What? We're mostly more or less the same? That defies common sense. I mean, take the way we look. We can immediately spot genetic differences in our appearances, can't we? And this is a matter of great intimacy and privacy. It's our very own thing, our bodies.
First time I was kind of intimate with a boy, we didn't have sex, but he was my boyfriend, and he said, you know, I've made you this beautiful bath, and it had all beautiful perfume in it and candles all around it and everything. And he said, take off your clothes and get into the bath with me. I was absolutely horrified.
But you must have got over that quickly enough, Sophie.
I was mortified.
Oh.
And it didn't help when actually his dad came back and threw us out of the house.
Not the most perfect way to learn how to enjoy your own body. One way to avoid that sort of thing is to not take risks, perhaps.
I had a lot of trouble steeling myself up to have anything to do with the opposite sex at all. That's not because I was totally uninterested. It was I just couldn't imagine anybody wanted to go out with me. There was a girl I was very keen on, but I just didn't imagine she'd want to have anything to do with me, so better not to get hurt and keep out of the way.
Yes, better not to try. Like Stephen there, I remember spending 2 years worshipping someone, but saying nothing to her. Better to have the feelings of desire than the feelings of rejection. And anyway, if or when you do catch a partner, as Louise did, there are more pitfalls lying in wait.
I think the worst thing in all this inadequacy for me was when I became engaged to my husband, and I was so excited, and I went home to show off my new ring to my family, and my mother turned to me and said, opals are unlucky. I felt like $1 million, and then my mother said this to me, and I felt shattered and ran to my room and cried.
Shattered? Your own mother, of all people. How could she do that? And a comment like that becomes, just like the opal, set in stone. And the stone gets fixed in your head, and there it stays. Well, that's maybe how we think of it, but it's not really a stone, and if there's any staying like a stone in your head going on, isn't that because it's you doing the holding? It doesn't stay there of its own accord. But some of us think that we each inhabit an imaginary room, and each room is labelled with the appropriate sign, nice, nasty, or inferior. And that's it. That's your room with your very own chair in it.
What we all need to understand is that even though the world seems to be exactly as it appears to us, and that we are as we seem to be to ourselves, all we can ever know are our ideas or our theories about the world. So feeling inferior is simply a theory about who you are and what you are.
You mean the feeling of being inferior is not a fact? It's like any other idea we might have, like, say, hey, why don't we go to Devon for a holiday this year? Or, I think of trees as my friends. If that's the case, then the feeling of being inferior is something I can unthink, or at least alter.
As it's a theory, you're free to change it. You might decide that feeling yourself to be superior might not be an improvement, because you've learnt that superior people often get taken down a peg or two. So you might decide to see yourself as ordinary, like everybody else. And so you don't have to feel that you have to earn the right to exist. You're an ordinary human being, and you can live your life amongst other ordinary human beings.
So I could change being inferior into being ordinary. And then, Dorothy seems to be saying, If I woke up and realised that we are in fact all ordinary most of the time, it would release me from fretting over whether I'm inferior or not. Mary wants to change, and if she could afford it, would. I wonder if this is what Dorothy means.
As a woman, I'm sure I'm not alone in saying I don't particularly like anything about me. And I can remember a particular example with 3 of us talking, and one girl was obese and another girl wasn't particularly attractive. And I'm not saying that I am, but we all were talking about what we would do if we had the money to change something about our appearance. And the obese girl went, I'd quite like thicker hair. And the other girl couldn't actually think of anything about herself that she didn't like. And I just couldn't believe it. And I went, well, I'd like to start at the top and work my way down.
Wait a minute. I've got a hunch that not attractive woman might have got it more right than Mary. It seems as if she's happy enough with who she is.
Some people are so convinced of their inferiority, they make it an excuse for never trying to achieve anything, but they comfort themselves by saying, if this and this hadn't happened, then I would have been a great writer or a great footballer, so that they're trying to give themselves the prize of being superior without going out in the world and trying to get it, to overcome their difficulties.
So there's something we have to do. We have to take some kind of action to break the grip of this idea. And it is only an idea. And indeed, so's the grip itself. We just invent all that. Sophie is a writer who no longer shows other people her latest bit of writing.
One boyfriend started doing it. He was like going, 2 pages in. And I went, that's it. I'm sorry, you're not allowed to look at this anymore. I just realised that I physically put myself into the bin of life by letting somebody do that to me. And he felt that he could be powerful over me by making me feel inferior about my actual creative work. Well, obviously, went the way of all flesh.
I used to play the piano. He didn't like me playing the piano.
Jessie sees how she let herself be dictated to by others, or to be more precise, by her husband.
I wasn't very good, but I used to play the hymns for school, and he thought it was terrible. I don't have a piano now.
How you feel about yourself is central to everything you do, every decision that you make, every interaction that you have with other people. So if you change from seeing yourself as being inferior to seeing yourself as an acceptable, ordinary human being, then everything about you will change.
The first thing was moving away from the area where I had felt so inferior and yet adequate.
People find change scary. We all find it scary because we can't predict what's going to happen.
So I moved to a different area.
Anything could happen.
And I've just completed the first year of a degree in design and illustration.
Many of us prefer to stay with the devil we know than risk the devil we don't know. We prefer to stay with the pain we know than to go with uncertainty.
I've made friends, and I know that I can do things that are good, which I never thought I could do before.
It takes courage to change, to be prepared to change and be open to change.
So it's difficult, it's painful, but there are rewards. There is a payoff.
I think this is the first time that I feel independent and of some value.
Hang on, it can't be that easy. Aren't we bombarded with images and voices telling us about rich, clever, beautiful people? For goodness sake, I want to be Bill Gates, and Brad Pitt, and Albert Einstein, and I never will be. It's agony.
If you say that your life is ruined because you've never become extremely rich or you've never been publicly shown to be the cleverest person ever, then that is just you creating your own pain. It's a sad old thing, you know, it doesn't matter. There's so many of us on the planet, we all come and go very quickly, that it's better to enjoy your life while you're having it, rather than either worry about what other people are thinking of you or what people in the future will think of you.
What? You mean on top of all this stuff about learning how to change how I think of myself, I've also got to learn how to be content with the fact that there are millions and millions of us? But you can't. What was it that the WHO told us? People try to put us down. Exactly.
And now I'm going to quote Eleanor Roosevelt. Nobody can ever make you feel inferior without your consent.
Oh, so the WHO should have sung, people try to put us down, but they can't because we don't let them. Perhaps the WHO were saying that and I didn't notice. That's me. You know, I have the sense that we live in a time when, yes, we often feel that we're dwarfed by all the better-looking, stronger, richer and more powerful people. At the same time, we're also dwarfed by catastrophes and wars and disasters. But this is only for as long as we see ourselves as small. One way you stop feeling small, alone and inferior is to find some other people, and with them make something, do something, learn something. And then you haven't got so much time to worry about whether that person over there thinks you're rubbish or not.
The thing is, people don't think of you. They're too busy thinking about themselves.
On Being Inferior was written and presented by Michael Rosen and inadequately produced by Paul Cobrack.